Welcome to part 2 of the Trestle table build. Now I'm making the tenons for the center sections on the table here with the radial arm saw, which this tool makes this process fairly easy. I put a little stop and I can match up each one. Here I'm cutting the mortises for the legs, for basically 2 of these for each side of the table. Going 1 inch, forcing bits of 1 inch width, and I believe I'm 1.5 inches depth to match up with the tenons I just cut on the rail arm saw for the center section, top and bottom. So have it blocked, so I have this each stop set up for each line, so each one to be cut correctly at 9 inches, and then also I have it locked so when the bit goes in, it doesn't want to pivot front to back. Maintains a straight line to the So here I'm cleaning up the edge on that mortise I just cut with the chisel. I'm not squaring up the ends on this. I leave the tenon round, and that seems to be a little easier to make that round with the chisel, and it also fits a little easier that way, at least for me. So. I'm taking the bandsaw here to hit the mortise. Excuse me, the tenon has to be 9 inches, so that's what I'm doing, cutting these off at 9 inches and scarring up pretty well easily with the bandsaw here. Here I'm taking the chisel and rounding the tenon on each end, a little back and forth, take a little bit off, see how it fits. Seems to work fairly well. I mean, after you do it a while, you get pretty good at it. But the fit seems to be a little better that way for me anyway. So that's the way I like doing it. Once I get them all fitting correctly, it's now glue up time. The big thing here is to make sure each one is square, which all came out pretty well. I had a few little issues, gaps. I had maybe 1 or 2 of them that had leave, but otherwise they fit pretty square from the start. So now it's time to make the stretcher. This is made out of a 3.5 inch by 2.5 poplar beam. I think it's like 5 feet long. Just using the rail arm saw here to kind of, and this is rough, so there's not, either side is not, it hasn't been planed, so I have to kind of guesstimate here on leave myself a little bit of extra when I cut this. So here I'm using the bandsaw to cut the other side of the tenon for the stretcher. Again, to leave myself a little bit of room with the caliper here so I don't cut it too much off. Now it's time to drill that part for the wedge here. I'm doing this at 5 degrees. I'm just using a 1/2 inch Forstner bit. Like I say, then the table is tilted to 5 degrees, and then I also have a stop belt here for so each side will be cut the same. All right, so I need to clarify here. So you cut the part that wedges up against the other wedge is 5 degrees, and the rest of it is at 90 degrees. So here I'm straightening the table back to 90 and finishing the mortise. Here I'm just putting a little bit of an angle on each end to help it fit in that the mortise on the center section of the table. So. Here I'm cutting the wedges at 5 degrees with my miter saw. The length is 5.5 inches, so they just fit on that 10-inch saw blade. So now I have to put a round edge on that one part of the wedge. I don't have a router. This is a roto zip with a 1/4 inch round over bit. I use this to help start the round, and then I use the belt sander here to finish it, the finish radius, and it actually worked out pretty well. So the width of the wedges was kind of an issue with me. I had to, this is the third time I tried it. I think it ended up being like 2 3/4 inches wide. The 5 degrees does not give you a whole lot of movement, which I found out, but eventually I got it figured out. So here I'm taking my power planer and starting the process of flattening the table. I got probably 1/4 inch of tip up, I guess, with the way this thing came together. So quite a lot of planing to get this thing flat. I did use my jack plane quite a bit also too. That doesn't take off near as much at a time, and it's just a little more forgiving. The main thing here is you got to make sure that your blade is point sharp to make this effective and work a little better. Probably one of the tools on my list to get is another better plane for this. This is a $25 Stanley job. It it worked okay, but definitely there's better planes out there I can if I spend a little more money. So I'm just about done. I ended up having probably, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch of a tip up on either end. So it's actually works out further well. If you do spill something, it's going to roll to the middle of the table instead of roll off to the side of it. So it's kind of a added benefit. Now I'm starting the sanding process with a 6-inch belt sander, 40 grit. Wood is not too bad, but there's some rough part of it there where I needed to take the 40 grit, and especially getting off the marks from the planer. This worked pretty well. One thing too, I also used the belt sander to square up all the ends because of this way I laminated. I really couldn't take a saw and cut it, so each end I had to take the belt sander in by eye to get everything basically 90 degrees. I also used the belt sander here to round the edges off too as well. Like I say, I don't have a router, but I got pretty good at it, and I can maintain a pretty consistent radius with enough practice. So now I'm doing the taking belt sander script on the ends. Just basically go back and forth, change the angle, and make sure you get decent paper. It works pretty well. So now it's time to fill the gaps. I use this sawdust so I can match it up with the white light and darker from the sawdust coming off the sanding. And basically it's glue, and I also mix this with epoxy. Um, I did a couple different ways on this project. Probably next time I'll probably just use the epoxy with the sawdust. Seems to be the best and consistent way to doing it. So I'm mainly filling the bigger gaps here. The small nail holes I just leave alone. Anything that you can rub your finger over and catch something is usually what I'll fill. Here I'm taking the belt sander to round the edges over with 40 grit, and then I switch to a regular sander with 80 grit to help smooth out those marks from the belt sander. So I guess the style of this is kind of a farmhouse, kind of a table per se. My idea here, I want to make sure that the table is really smooth across it with imperfections, some imperfections, but basically if you move a glass, it's not going to catch on an edge and tip over, or a plate's not going to sit, crooked when it gets caught on an edge. So that's my goal here, is to make it about 95% smooth. Okay, now it's time to fit the tabletop to the legs here. I'm just setting it on here, centering it, and gonna draw some lines to mark where those legs should end up being. I'm just using a 1/2 inch Forstner bit here to recess for the screw head. It's gonna hold the table to the legs. So now I'm just taking a drill bit slightly bigger than the screw I'm using and going right in the center of that recess hole I just made with the Forstner bit. And I'm also marking each place on the tabletop where the hole needs to be finished with a smaller drill bit. Here I'm taking the smaller drill bit with the little piece of tape so I get the depth correct, and that way the screw will have some threads or be able to grab some wood. So I use dowels, 1-inch dowels on each of the 4 corners to hold the table into place. So now I'm drilling a hole that I'm going to put a small little pin or nail into the leg part here, and then I'll tip that over up on top of the tabletop and make a mark so I know where to drill my 1-inch Forstner bit hole. I'm just placing those little nails in each hole now. Tipping this over, I basically have one shot to get it pretty close to where it needs to be, so I'm kind of trying to be real careful with dropping over and then making a fine adjustment here before I set those nails into the tabletop. I'm just putting the screw in to make sure it lines up the hole I previously drilled to make sure it's aligned correctly here. Once that mark came through, I just take the 1-inch Forstner bit here and I'm drilling approximately a 1/2 inch deep on each of the 4 corners. Now I'm just kind of widening that hole a little bit so we'll have a little side-to-side play. I don't expect this table ever to move because of the way it's been laminated together, but that's just a precaution for moisture movement. Now I'm drilling the same 1/2 inch depth into each of the legs here from that same nail hole that it was drilled, where the nail was placed. Using the caliper here to get the depth of each, so I know what length to make the dowels. Cutting each one here with a very large saw, and then I'm going to install them and glue them into each of the table legs. Here I'm just using the impact here, just take the screw down until it gets tight and stop, and I don't want to go any farther than that. There's some slight variations here, so now I'm taking the table up and I'm going to use a marker to mark the holes, color code in the hole in the dowel, so when you put the table back together you can put it back exactly the way it came apart. This is the bottom side here. I'm just putting on Danish natural oil and just one coat. Now it's time to stain. I'm staining up all the legs here with the Danish oil, starting with that, and then I'll finish that with a polyurethane. I think I end up doing like 3 coats total on each of the legs here. Going to start the staining process on the tabletop. I'm wiping mineral spirits here to clean it up, all the dust, and I think I come in with a little air on it and then start the staining. So my first coat here is the Danish oil, and I'm using a 600 grit sandpaper to rub it in. That's just the way I learned back in high school, how to apply stain on the hardwood, and this is my first coat. So this will dry at least, I think it's 24 hours before I apply the next coat as well. On the stretcher here, I have just a light sand on it. I'm just applying some water-based polyurethane to maintain the color. I think I put on 3 coats of this as well. Now I'm just prepping for another coat here, a little sanding and air, and then I'll use the mineral spirits here to clean up all the dust from sanding, and then I think now I apply the wipe-on polyurethane on this coat here. So my last finish here was a general product gel wipe on polyurethane. I think this is the 3rd coat of that. So you apply it and then you actually wipe it off a little bit to wipe all the marks off, and then sand, and that's reapply. So this is the last finish. Okay, now the table is all done, dried. I'm putting the wedges in just lightly into place to help to keep the table or the legs fairly 90 degrees, and then I'm going to put the top on top. The table weighs about 200 pounds, so here I thought I could just lay it there and then tip it up, but after I had it up in the air, it was easier for me to just set it on top. This table is a 30-inch high by 7 foot by 40 inches wide. Standard dinner table height.